Hey there, ready to unlock some creative superpowers.
Sounds exciting.
Today we're diving deep into Austin Kleon's Keep Going. 10 ways to stay creative in good times and bad.
I love that book.
He's a writer and artist known for his work on creativity and how we share it with the world.
Yeah, he's got a really interesting perspective.
But this isn't some lofty theoretical stuff. Kleon wrote this book to help himself and all of us navigate the real-life struggles of keeping that creative spark alive.
It's so relatable, right? He's right there in the trenches with us.
Right. So whether you're a seasoned artist or just starting to explore your creative side, Cleon's got some practical wisdom to offer.
Absolutely. He doesn't just talk about creativity, he gives you actionable steps.
He kicks things off by talking about the daily loop, comparing the creative journey to, of all things, Groundhog Day.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Groundhog Day.
Now, I'm all about a good movie reference, but I'm curious how that ties into creativity. Help me out here.
Well, think about Phil Connors, stuck reliving the same day over and over.
Yeah, initially it's torture.
Right, pure torture. But then gradually he starts to use that repetition.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
He masters new skills, explores different things, and ultimately finds meaning in what seemed totally monotonous.
So instead of seeing routine as this rigid, confining thing,
We can actually view it as a framework for creative exploration.
like even when inspiration takes a hike, that structure keeps us creating.
Exactly. Cultivating a daily practice, even something small and different.
It gives us a buffer against all those things that can throw us off.
Creative blocks, self-doubt, all the distractions of modern life.
I'm starting to see how this connects to Kleon's next point about making lists. He's
Yeah.
not just talking about to-do lists, right?
No, he goes way beyond that. He sees lists as a way to manage the chaos of creative work.
That makes sense.
It doesn't matter if it's a list of ideas, inspirations, resources, or even things you don't want to do.
Okay, so like a what not to-do list.
Yeah. He even have a what not to do list inspired by the punk band Wire.
I love that. So it's about getting it all out of your head and onto paper.
Putting it down helps you get clarity and focus. It's like externalizing that mental clutter.
That leads us to another interesting idea from Kleon the Bliss Station.
Ah, yes. It sounds so peaceful, doesn't it?
Okay, so is this like a dedicated creative space, all decked out with mood lighting and inspirational quotes?
It can be. But the real essence of a bliss station is about intentionality, not just how it looks.
Okay, so less about aesthetics, more about purpose.
Right. It's any space, physical or even just a specific time, where you disconnect from the outside world and connect with yourself.
I like that. So it could be a quiet corner in your home, a park bench, or even just a certain time of day when you switch off all notifications.
Precisely. It's about intentionally carving out time and space to nurture your creativity.
Away from all the demands and distractions that are constantly fighting for our attention.
And speaking of distractions, Kleon has strong feelings about how we start our days.
I'm listening.
He actually advises against news and social media first thing in the morning.
Oh, I am so guilty of that. Doom scrolling in the morning is my specialty.
He argues that bombarding ourselves with negativity so early sets a bad tone for the entire day.
That makes sense. It's like depleting our creative energy before we've even had a chance to tap into it.
Right, and he's not alone in this observation. Even Thoreau, back in the 19th century, complained about newspapers stealing his focus.
Wow, so this isn't just a modern problem. It seems like people have been struggling with protecting their attention for centuries.
Absolutely. So instead of news and social media, Kleon suggests filling those precious morning hours with things that nourish our well-being and cultivate a positive mindset.
Like what? Give me some examples.
It could be anything from meditation or journaling to a walk in nature or just enjoying a quiet cup of coffee. Starting the day with intention sets the stage for creativity.
It's like choosing to cultivate a fertile garden for your mind instead of letting it become overrun with weeds.
I love that analogy. And building on this idea of disconnecting from the digital overload, Kleon suggests embracing what he calls airplane mode as a way of life.
Wait, does this mean I have to start wearing those inflatable neck pillows everywhere I go?
Not exactly. He takes inspiration from the artist Nina Kachadurian and her project Seat Assignment.
What's that?
She uses airplane travel restrictions as a way to fuel her creativity.
Okay, so she's turning limitations into opportunities.
I like that. Precisely. And Kleon challenges us to replicate that mindset in our everyday lives, even when we're not flying.
So what would that look like?
Imagine intentionally disconnecting from that constant stream of information and notifications.
Creating those pockets of focus where deep work and creative breakthroughs can happen.
Right. And that leads perfectly into his next point, which is all about mastering the art of saying no.
Oh, that's a tough one.
He points out how many creatives throughout history have devised clever ways to protect their time and energy by declining invitations. Oliver Sacks, Le Corbusier, you name it.
So setting boundaries is key.
Exactly. Every yes to one thing is a no to something else.
And in our hyper-connected world, where there's this constant pressure to be available and responsive, learning to say no gracefully becomes even more important.
I completely agree. It's like that constant tug of war between FOMO, the fear of missing out, and JOMO, the joy of missing out.
Kleon is definitely Team Jomo.
100%. And he offers practical advice on how to decline gracefully without feeling guilty.
Like what?
He even suggests creating email templates for common scenarios, which I thought was brilliant.
Okay, so we've talked about routines, lists, bliss stations, attention management, and saying no. What's next on Kleon's list?
This one really resonated with me, his advice to be the verb, not the noun.
Okay, what does that mean?
He's encouraging us to shift our focus away from labels and titles and instead zero in on the actions of creating.
Oh, I see. So it's not about striving to be a writer or an artist.
It's about the act of writing, creating art, the doing.
So let the work speak for itself, rather than getting hung up on labels.
Exactly. And by releasing ourselves from those labels, we open up to greater creative freedom and exploration. We can experiment, blur the lines between disciplines, and discover new aspects of our creative selves.
That's so liberating. It's like saying, don't let the noun box you in, become the verb, and let your creativity flow.
I'm sensing a theme here. Kleon seems to be all about challenging conventional thinking and encouraging a more playful approach to creativity.
You're right on the mark. And that brings us to his next point, the importance of play.
Ah, play. I love that.
Kleon observes how effortlessly children approach creativity. Pure joy, intense focus, and freedom from attachment to outcomes.
It's true. As kids, we create just for the sheer pleasure of it. No overthinking, no judgment, just pure imagination.
And he believes that rediscovering that childlike sense of wonder and playfulness is crucial for sustaining a vibrant creative practice.
I love that. So how do we do that? How do we bring back that playfulness?
He even mentions Kurt Vonnegut's suggestion to write a poem and then just throw it away. Wow, that's radical. But I can see how it would help detach from the pressure to create something perfect or successful. It's about the process, not the product.
Exactly. How can we reintroduce play into our creative routines? What sparks our curiosity and brings us joy? How can we approach our creative endeavors with a lighter, more playful mindset?
Such good questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so far we've covered routines, lists, bliss stations, attention management, saying no, being the verb, and embracing play. What else is on Kleon's list of creative wisdom?
Well, he tackles something I think a lot of creatives wrestle with, particularly today. He calls it success.
Success. Okay, I've definitely been there. It's that feeling when the pressure to achieve, to gain recognition, to monetize your passions starts to eclipse the pure joy of creating.
You nailed it. It's that moment when achievement or chasing it just starts to feel, well, sucky.
Exactly. It's like the pursuit of success can sometimes suck the joy out of the very thing we're passionate about.
He explores those potential pitfalls of turning passion into a profession, the challenges of navigating the marketplace while staying true to yourself. He warns against prioritizing market success over artistic fulfillment.
That's a tough balance, especially today. There's so much emphasis on personal branding and monetization.
It really is. But Kleon reminds us that while making a living from our creative work is incredibly rewarding, we need to be mindful of those potential downsides.
Like burnout.
Burnout, creative stagnation, even disillusionment. He suggests carving out a part of our creative practice that remains just for us, a space where we create purely for the joy of it, without any external pressures or expectations.
I love that. It's like having a secret garden where our creativity can bloom without judgment or the need for validation.
Exactly. And it reminds me of Lewis Hyde's concept of the gift economy in art.
What's that?
He argues that there's value in creating just for the act of creation, for the joy of giving, without any expectation of receiving something in return.
That's such a beautiful concept. Like art as an act of love, generosity, connection.
He gives the example of A. A. Milne writing Winnie the Pooh for his son, or Astrid Lindgren creating Pippi Longstocking for her daughter. Stories born from love and connection that have touched generations.
That's so inspiring. It's like a reminder that sometimes the most powerful and enduring creative works emerge from a place of pure, unadulterated joy and connection.
Absolutely. And this leads us to another strategy that's super relevant in our hyper-connected, metric-driven world.
I'm all ears.
Tuning out the metrics, at least to some extent.
I know I need to work on this. I get way too caught up in likes, shares, followers, all those external measures of success that, let's be honest, don't actually reflect the true value or impact of our work.
Kleon reminds us that those online metrics can be very seductive, but they can also become a source of anxiety and distraction.
Pulling us away from the intrinsic rewards of our creative endeavors. It's a creativity killer.
It really is. So he encourages us to focus on the qualitative aspects of our work, the personal satisfaction, the meaningful connections, the impact it has on ourselves and others.
So reclaiming our creative autonomy, right? Shifting from external validation to internal fulfillment.
Precisely. And practically speaking, that might look like turning off analytics for a while, limiting social media time, or seeking feedback from trusted sources rather than relying on algorithms to tell us what's good or valuable.
I think I need a digital detox ASAP.
I hear you. And speaking of detoxing, this time from rigid thinking, Kleon also emphasizes embracing uncertainty and being open to changing our minds.
That's an interesting one. Our culture often values certainty and unwavering conviction. But in the creative realm, isn't there a benefit to questioning assumptions and exploring different perspectives?
Absolutely. Kleon reminds us that the creative process is messy and full of unexpected discoveries.
Twists and turns, dead ends, and sudden bursts of inspiration.
To truly embrace that uncertainty, we need safe spaces to experiment, play with ideas, even be wrong, and change our minds without fear of judgment.
So where do we find those safe spaces? In a world that can feel like a giant echo chamber, how do we create environments that foster open-mindedness and intellectual exploration?
Kleon suggests going offline, retreating to our bliss stations, our studios, our journals, those places where we can think freely and let our ideas develop.
I love that idea. Going off the grid to connect with our authentic creative selves. It's like giving ourselves permission to think differently.
Precisely. And he also stresses the importance of surrounding ourselves with like-minded people, those who are open-minded and curious.
Finding those intellectual sparring partners who can challenge our assumptions and help us see things from different angles.
Yes. And Kleon doesn't limit this to conversations with living people. He encourages us to engage with the dead, to read old books, to delve into ideas from different eras and cultures.
It's like tapping into this vast reservoir of knowledge and wisdom, expanding our horizons.
And in a world obsessed with novelty, there's something really grounding about immersing ourselves in the timeless wisdom of the past.
Okay, we've talked about uncertainty, safe spaces, and expanding our intellectual horizons. What's next on Kleon's agenda for staying creative?
Well, this one might surprise you. He delves into the realm of clutter and its potential role in creativity.
Wait, hold on. Isn't a tidy workspace essential for productivity? I'm picturing those perfectly organized desks you see on Instagram.
Kleon actually challenges that notion. He argues that a certain degree of messiness can actually be conducive to creative breakthroughs.
He's not suggesting we live in squalor, is he?
Not at all. It's about striking a balance between chaos and order, creating a workspace that feels stimulating and functional.
So it's not about having a sterile environment. It's about having everything you need readily available, but with enough breathing room for spontaneity.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a French chef's mise en place.
Oh, that meticulous preparation and organization that allows them to work so efficiently and creatively in the kitchen.
Right. It's about having a system that supports your creative flow, not one that stifles it.
I like that.
He also talks about the importance of serendipity in creativity. Sometimes the most unexpected combinations lead to the most exciting discoveries.
It reminds me of that Picasso quote, "The chief enemy of creativity is good sense." Sometimes we have to let go of logic and embrace a little chaos to find those truly innovative ideas.
Precisely. Kleon encourages us to welcome the unexpected, allow for some randomness in our creative process.
Trusting that sometimes the best ideas emerge from the messiest beginnings.
Now get ready for this one, Kleon's thoughts on sleep.
I'm ready. I've always been fascinated by how creative people approach sleep. Some are all about routines, others thrive on late nights. What does Kleon say?
He sees sleep as a way for our brains to process information, make new connections. He even calls naps a secret weapon for artists.
It's like giving our subconscious minds the time and space to do their thing while our conscious minds get some rest.
He talks about Salvador Dali's rather unusual spoon-dropping technique to induce those hypnagogic states.
Hypnagogic states.
You know, that twilight zone between wakefulness and sleep, that's often when creativity flourishes.
Oh, I get it. I love that image of Dolly napping with the spoon, ready to capture those flashes of inspiration.
So, for our listeners, think about how you approach sleep. Are you getting enough rest? Are you giving your subconscious mind a chance to work its magic?
Great questions. I might just schedule a nap after this recording. But speaking of rejuvenation, I'm curious to hear Cleon's take on walking and connecting with nature.
He's a big fan. He talks about his daily walks as a source of inspiration, time for conversation, contemplation, and brainstorming.
I'm with him on that one. There's
He's
something about getting out in the fresh air that completely shifts my perspective.
And he's not alone in this. So many artists and thinkers, from Wordsworth to Thoreau, have praised walking as a catalyst for creativity.
It's like stepping outside of our usual routines, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. Encountering new ideas, observing the world with fresh eyes, allowing our minds to wander.
It's like a reminder that inspiration can be found everywhere, not just in those traditional creative spaces.
And building on that idea of connection, Kleon challenges us to think about the impact our creative work has on the world.
So it's not just about leaving our mark, but about leaving a positive one, making a contribution.
He suggests adopting new slogans for creative work, ones that emphasize responsibility, sustainability, and interconnectedness.
I love that. It's a call for a more mindful and ethical approach to creativity.
So, for our listeners, think about this. How can you infuse your own creative practice with a sense of purpose and responsibility? How can your work contribute to the well-being of others, to the health of our planet?
Those are some powerful questions to ponder. It sounds like Leon's inviting us to view creativity not just as a personal pursuit, but as a force for positive change.
Absolutely. And as we move towards the end of his book, Kleon reflects on the cyclical nature of creativity.
Okay, I'm curious.
He draws inspiration from Sister Karita Kent's observations of a maple tree outside her window.
What does a maple tree have to do with creativity?
Kleon finds a fascinating parallel between the natural world and the creative journey.
I'm listening.
They both experience these periods of growth, dormancy, renewal, and transformation.
It's a reminder that our creative lives aren't these straight lines, but rather cycles, with seasons of intense productivity and seasons of quiet reflection.
Exactly. He even compares the tree's winter dormancy to those times when we might feel stuck creatively.
It's not a failure. It's just a season of rest and regeneration.
Like when Leonard Woolf found comfort in gardening after Virginia Woolf's death. Even in grief, he found solace and renewal in nature.
That's a beautiful example. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, doesn't it?
It truly does. And Kleon reminds us that creative fulfillment isn't about reaching a destination, it's about the journey itself.
The continual process of growth and discovery. I like that.
He encourages us to find inspiration from those creatives who've sustained their practices over decades, not just those with early success. Think of people like Bill Cunningham, Joan Rivers, Pablo Casals, all creating and contributing well into their later years.
It's really inspiring, isn't it? It shows the power of passion, resilience, and dedication to one's craft.
It really does. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Keep Going, what resonates most with you?
I think Cleon's emphasis on cultivating a sustainable creative practice is so important.
Absolutely. One that nourishes and challenges us and allows us to make a meaningful contribution to the world.
Well said. And listeners, stay tuned as we continue our exploration of Austin Kleon's Keep Going in the next part of this episode.
You know, we were talking about those online metrics and the trap of chasing validation. Kleon actually dives deeper into this, exploring what he calls success.
Right, that point when achievement or the pursuit of it starts to feel, well, kind of sucky.
Exactly. And I think it's something a lot of creative folks struggle with, especially today.
For sure, it's like that pressure to constantly be on, to monetize your passion, to achieve that next level of success can take the joy out of creating.
It's a real dilemma. Kleon doesn't sugarcoat it. He talks about the potential downsides of turning what you love into a job.
So how do you navigate that? How do you stay true to your art while also trying to make a living from it?
He suggests having a separate part of your creative practice that is just for you. A place where you create for the sheer joy of it without any pressure to perform or please anyone else.
Oh, I love that. It's like having a creative sanctuary, a place where you can experiment and play without judgment.
Exactly. It reminds me of the concept of the gift economy in art.
Okay, tell me more about that. I'm not familiar with that term.
It's the idea that creating something simply for the act of creation, for the joy of giving it away without expecting anything in return, has inherent value.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. Art is a gift, a form of generosity.
He gives the example of A. Milne writing Winnie the Pooh just for his son, or Astrid Lindgren creating Pippi Longstocking for her daughter. These stories, born out of love and connection, have touched countless lives.
Those are such powerful examples. It reminds me that some of the most meaningful creative works come from a place of pure joy and connection.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, another strategy Kleon emphasizes, especially relevant in our tech-driven world, is tuning out the metrics.
Oh, this is a big one for me. I'm definitely guilty of getting caught up in likes and shares and followers. It's like this constant need for validation.
Kleon argues that those online metrics, while seductive, can become a huge source of anxiety and distraction.
Pulling us away from the intrinsic rewards of being creative, right? It's such a creativity killer.
He encourages us to focus on the qualitative aspects of our work instead. The personal satisfaction we derive from creating, the connections we make, the impact we have on others.
It's about reclaiming that sense of creative autonomy, shifting our focus from external validation to internal fulfillment.
Exactly. And practically speaking, that might mean turning off those analytics for a while, limiting our time on social media, or seeking feedback from people we trust instead of relying on algorithms to tell us what's good.
I think a digital detox is definitely in order for me. But speaking of detoxing, this time from rigid thinking, Kleon also talks about the importance of embracing uncertainty and being open to changing our minds.
It's an interesting point, right? We live in a culture that often values certainty and conviction above all else.
But in the creative process, it seems like being willing to question assumptions and explore different perspectives is so valuable.
Kleon argues that the creative process is inherently messy, full of twists and turns and unexpected discoveries.
We have to be comfortable with not knowing all the answers, with going down the wrong path sometimes, and then being willing to change course.
Exactly. To truly embrace that uncertainty, we need spaces where we can experiment freely, play with ideas, even be wrong, and change our minds without fear of judgment.
Okay, so where do we find those safe spaces? In a world that often feels like one giant echo chamber, how do we create environments that foster open-mindedness and creative exploration?
Cleon suggests going offline, retreating to our bliss stations, our studios, our journals, those places where we can think freely and let our ideas develop without distractions.
I love that idea. It's like giving ourselves permission to think differently, to color outside the lines.
Precisely. He also emphasizes surrounding ourselves with people who are curious, open-minded, and willing to engage in meaningful dialogue.
Finding those intellectual sparring partners who can help us see things from new angles.
And Cleon doesn't stop there. He even encourages us to engage with the dead, to read old books, explore ideas from different eras and cultures.
It's like expanding our intellectual horizons, tapping into this vast wellspring of knowledge and wisdom.
And in a world obsessed with the latest and greatest, there's something incredibly grounding about immersing ourselves in the wisdom of the past.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about uncertainty, safe spaces, expanding our intellectual horizons. What's next on Cleon's list of creative strategies?
This one might seem counterintuitive, but he delves into the potential role of clutter in creativity.
Wait, hold on. Isn't a tidy workspace supposed to be the key to productivity? All those perfectly organized desks we see online.
Kleon actually challenges that conventional wisdom. He argues that a certain amount of messiness can actually be helpful for creative breakthroughs.
He's not saying we should all live in chaos, right?
Not at all. It's about finding that sweet spot between order and disorder, creating a workspace that feels both stimulating and functional.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about having what you need within reach, but also having enough breathing room for those spontaneous moments of inspiration to strike.
Exactly. He uses the example of a French chef's mise en place, that meticulous organization of ingredients and tools that allows for both efficiency and creativity in the kitchen.
It's about having a system that supports your creative flow, rather than one that hinders it.
And he also talks about the importance of serendipity. Sometimes the most unexpected combinations of things lead to the most interesting results.
It's like that Picasso quote, "The chief enemy of creativity is good sense." We have to be willing to let go of logic sometimes and just see what happens.
Exactly. Cleon encourages us to welcome the unexpected, allow for some randomness, and trust that sometimes the most fruitful ideas emerge from the messiest of beginnings.
I like that. Okay, now for a topic that might make some of our listeners sleepy. Cleon's thoughts on sleep and creativity.
He views sleep as a time for mental housekeeping, a time for our brains to process information, make new connections, and come up with fresh ideas. He even calls naps a secret weapon for many artists.
It's like giving our subconscious mind the time and space it needs to work its magic. while our conscious mind gets some rest.
He even mentions Salvador Dali's rather unusual spoon-dropping technique for inducing those hypnagogic states.
Hypnagogic states. Refresh my memory.
You know that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep where creativity often flourishes?
Oh, right. I love that visual of Dolly napping with a spoon, ready to catch those fleeting moments of inspiration.
So for our listeners, think about your own approach to sleep. Are you getting enough rest? Are you giving your subconscious mind a chance to do its thing?
Those are great questions. I might need to schedule a nap after this recording. But speaking of rejuvenation, I'm curious about what Kleon has to say about walking and connecting with nature.
He's a huge advocate for it. He talks about his daily walks as a time for inspiration, conversation, contemplation, and creative brainstorming.
I'm a big believer in that too. There's something about getting outside and moving my body that really clears my head.
And he's in good company. So many creative minds throughout history, from Wordsworth to Thoreau, have praised the power of walking for sparking creativity.
It's like we're stepping outside of our usual routines, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. We're encountering new ideas, observing the world with fresh eyes, letting our minds wander and make new connections.
It's like a reminder that inspiration isn't confined to traditional creative spaces. We can find it everywhere, especially in nature.
And building on that idea of connection, Cleon also challenges us to think about the impact our creative work has on the world.
So it's not just about self-expression or even achieving success, it's about using our creativity to make a positive contribution.
He suggests adopting new slogans for creative work, ones that emphasize responsibility, sustainability, and interconnectedness.
I love that. It's a call for a more mindful and ethical approach to creativity.
For our listeners, think about this. How can you infuse your own creative work with a sense of purpose and responsibility? How can your work contribute to the well-being of others, to the health of our planet?
Those are some powerful questions to consider. It sounds like Cleon's inviting us to see creativity not just as a personal pursuit, but as a force for positive change in the world.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up our exploration of his book, Cleon circles back to this idea of the cyclical nature of creativity.
Oh yeah, he mentioned that earlier, using the example of a maple tree.
He draws this beautiful parallel between the natural world and the creative process. Both go through these periods of growth, dormancy, renewal, and transformation.
It's a good reminder that our creative lives aren't linear. They're cyclical. There are seasons for everything, for planting seeds, nurturing growth, and harvesting the fruits of our labor.
Exactly. He even compares the tree's winter dormancy to those times in our creative lives when we might feel stuck or uninspired.
It's not a sign of failure. It's just a natural part of the process, a time for rest and rejuvenation.
Like Leonard Woolf finding solace in gardening after Virginia Woolf's death, he found comfort and renewal in nature.
That's a beautiful example. It speaks to our capacity for resilience and our innate need to create, even in the midst of grief.
It really does. And Cleon reminds us that creative fulfillment isn't about reaching a destination, it's about the journey itself.
The continual process of growth and discovery.
He encourages us to find inspiration from those who have sustained their creative practice over a lifetime, not just those who experience early success. People like Bill Cunningham, Joan Rivers, Pablo Casals, all of them creating and contributing well into their later years.
That's incredibly inspiring. It speaks to the power of passion, perseverance, and a lifelong dedication to one's craft.
It really does. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Cleon's Keep Going, what resonates most with you?
I think what sticks with me the most is his emphasis on cultivating a sustainable creative practice, one that nourishes and challenges us and allows us to make a meaningful contribution to the world.
Well said. And listeners, stay tuned for the final part of our exploration of Austin Kleon's Keep Going. So, picking up where we left off, remember that maple tree analogy Kleon uses?
Yeah, the one about the cyclical nature of creativity really stuck with me.
It's such a powerful image. He draws this parallel between the natural world and our own creative journeys.
It's a great reminder that just like in nature, there are seasons to our creativity too.
Exactly. There are times for growth, for rest, for renewal.
And those times when we feel stuck or uninspired aren't failures. They're just part of the natural ebb and flow.
He compares those fallow periods to the tree's winter dormancy, a time for going inward, gathering energy, and preparing for new growth.
It's like allowing our creative batteries to recharge.
And you know, it makes me think of Leonard Woolf finding solace in his garden after Virginia's passing. Even in the midst of grief, he found a way to connect with nature and find creative renewal.
That's such a poignant example. It speaks to the power of the creative spirit to find expression even in the darkest of times.
It really does. And Kleon also reminds us that creative fulfillment isn't about reaching some final destination. It's about the journey itself.
The continual process of growth and discovery.
Exactly. He encourages us to look at those creatives who have sustained their practice over a lifetime, not just those who achieve early success. People like Bill Cunningham, Joan Rivers, Pablo Casals, all of them creating and contributing well into their later years.
Their stories are so inspiring. It shows the power of passion, perseverance, and dedication to one's craft.
It truly does. As we wrap up our deep dive into Cleon's Keep Going, is there a particular strategy or idea that resonates most with you?
For me, it's his emphasis on embracing the daily loop, finding those small, consistent actions we can take day after day to nurture our creativity, regardless of how inspired we're feeling.
I love that. It's about showing up for our creative selves, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And it ties into his focus on establishing routines and cultivating habits that support our creative work.
Trusting the process, even when we don't see immediate results. Maybe our listeners can choose one of Cleon's strategies and experiment with it this week.
See how it impacts their energy, focus, and the quality of their work. And above all, remember Cleon's simple but profound message. Keep going, keep creating, keep exploring.
The world needs your unique voice, your vision, your creative contributions.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of creativity.
And until next time, keep those creative fires burning.